Waves slammed against the hulls in San Aegis harbor, salt spray stinging the air as the night watch changed. Inside the dim armory, a woman everyone thought was just a quiet supply clerk wiped down an old M24 sniper rifle. Then the rag slid across the stock and revealed a faint skull mark, etched deep into the wood. A mark that should not exist because the Deadeye Division it belonged to had been erased from history. Colonel Marcus Harlow stepped into the room, froze at the sight, and whispered, "Where did you get that rifle?" The woman didn't flinch. She looked up, the roar of the ocean behind her, and said calmly, "It was mine." What followed would rip open a conspiracy buried beneath the Navy's waves. Loyalty, betrayal, a sniper, duel above the storm-tossed mast of a warship. And a twist that will leave you speechless. Stay with us, because this isn't just about a forgotten rifle, it's about the ghost they tried to drown. If you believe hidden courage deserves the spotlight, hit subscribe right now and join us here on A Simple Woman, because Evelyn Ward's tide is rising. The harbor at San Aegis was never silent. Even at night, the sea kept its rhythm. Waves slapping against the seawall, gulls crying in the fog, the low groan of steel hulls shifting with the tide. Inside the armory, Evelyn Ward moved to that rhythm without thinking. She had been doing this job long enough that the sound of the ocean had become part of her breath. A rag in one hand, oil in the other, she worked over a line of rifles stacked on the workbench. To anyone passing by, she looked like what the records said she was. A supply clerk, a quiet woman with steady hands who kept the weapons clean. But when her rag slid across the battered stock of an old M24, her hands stopped. The light caught something carved deep into the wood. A skull, the edges worn but still visible if you knew where to look. Her chest tightened. She hadn't seen that mark in 3 years. She thought she never would again. Boots clicked on the deck behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Colonel Marcus Harlow, his presence filling the narrow room even before he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Where did you get that rifle?" Evelyn lifted her head, met his eyes, and for a moment, the roar of the ocean outside seemed to fade. She didn't bother to invent a story. She simply said, calm and certain, "It was mine." Harlow stared at her, at the faint mark carved into the weapon. He had heard the whispers, the ghost stories told in hushed voices. Deadeye Division, a sniper unit created for the missions no one else could touch, then erased when it became inconvenient. Officially, they had all been killed during Basra. Unofficially, they had been buried by their own. "I thought none of you made it out," he said, almost to himself. Evelyn laid the rifle gently on the bench, as if it was something fragile, not steel and wood that had carried death across oceans. That's what they wanted you to think. For 3 years she had hidden among sailors and dockworkers, content to let the sea wash over her past. But the mark on the M24 was more than a scar. It was a reminder, and Harlow's eyes told her that reminders had power. The foghorns outside bellowed, and with them came flashes of memory she could never outrun, fire crawling along a burning ship, the sudden silence of her comms, the faces of Jonas Cruz, Mira Kowal, Elias Kane vanishing into smoke. She had carried their absence like ballast, dragging her down with every breath. Harlow stepped closer, his voice harder now. "They didn't erase Deadeye because you failed. They erased you because you saw something they couldn't afford to expose." Evelyn looked back at him, steady, unblinking. "That truth drowned with my team." He shook his head. "No, the sea doesn't keep secrets. It always gives them back." The words landed heavier than the rifle in her hands. For years she had convinced herself that she could disappear into routine, that the tide would carry her guilt away. But Harlow's presence, and the skull carved into the M24 told her something different. The tide wasn't taking her past, it was bringing it back. She ran her thumb over the carving one last time, the edges sharp against her skin. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to say it out loud. Deadeye isn't finished. Not yet. The fog rolled in thick that night, curling around the docks of San Aegis like a living thing. The ships moored at anchor groaned against their lines, their lights dimmed to pinpricks in the mist. Evelyn Ward lingered in the Armory longer than usual, unable to shake the weight of Colonel Harlow's stare earlier that day. She had locked the M24 away, but the skull carved into its stock still burned in her mind like a brand. She told herself she would walk back to the barracks, keep her head down, live the way she had for 3 years. But when she opened the Armory door, she caught something in the fog, shapes moving, with too much precision to be dockhands, too much silence to be sailors. 3 figures in naval police uniforms emerged from the mist. Their boots clanged against the wet steel deck, their caps pulled low. The lead man raised a hand in a stiff gesture. "Ward, you're to come with us. Orders from command." Evelyn's instincts flared. She had seen enough real MPs to know their cadence, their posture, even the way they carried the weight of their sidearms. These men were wrong. Their belts were too loose, their boots polished but not broken in. Actors in costume. She stepped back into the shadow of the doorway, her voice calm. "What's the charge?" The lead man hesitated, questioning, "That's all." Lightning flickered over the harbor, and for a split second she saw the outline of a suppressed pistol tucked awkwardly at his hip. Not standard issue, not police issue at all. Evelyn let the silence stretch, then sighed as if tired. "All right," she said, and raised her hands slightly, but instead of stepping forward, she pivoted back into the Armory, her fingers brushing the side of the workbench where a sidearm rested, stripped for cleaning. The first man lunged, his partners fanning out. The crack of suppressed fire echoed in the steel room, muffled by the storm. Evelyn dove behind the bench, snapping the pistol back together in motions so practiced they felt like breathing. By the time the slide locked, she was already rolling to one knee. Her first shot punched through the fog, dropping the man at the doorway. The others opened fire wildly, bullets sparking off the racks of rifles, glass shattering from overhead lights. Evelyn moved low, weaving between shadows, her feet silent on the concrete. 2 more shots, clean and deliberate, cut down the second figure before he could even reload. The third man panicked, firing into empty air. Evelyn circled behind him, her presence a whisper in the mist, and pressed the barrel of her pistol against the back of his neck. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The man trembled, his breath ragged. "Shadow. Shadow command. We were told to finish what Basra didn't." Evelyn's jaw clenched. "General Alden." The name wasn't spoken, but it was written all over the man's fear. Before she could press further, headlights cut through the fog. A truck rumbled onto the dock. More armed men spilling out, their uniforms a patchwork of naval gear and unmarked black. Evelyn shoved the trembling man aside just as the barrage began. Bullets raked the Armory door, sparks flying. She sprinted through the side exit, boots splashing through puddles, the salt wind tearing at her hair. The fog was her ally now. She slid into its cover, ducking between stacks of shipping containers. As the assassins fanned out, their voices clipped with radio static. She moved like a ghost, every breath measured, every step chosen. 2 came close, their silhouettes blurred in the mist. She dropped low, waited for the crash of waves against the breakwater, then fired twice, 2 bodies collapsing into the sea with barely a splash. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, too far to matter. These men hadn't come for arrests. They had come to erase her, just as they had tried 3 years ago. But this time she wasn't crawling out of Basra alone. From the far end of the dock, a shadow emerged. Colonel Harlow, pistol raised, firing clean shots that cut down 2 attackers as they flanked. He moved with surprising precision, covering her advance. "Ward," he barked. "This way." They converged behind a stack of crates, the rain pelting harder now, masking the hiss of incoming boots. Evelyn's eyes burned with a cold clarity she hadn't felt since the division died. "They're not going to stop," Harlow said between shots. "No," Evelyn answered, chambering another round. Her voice was steel, "but neither am I." The fog swallowed the last of her words, but the men hunting her would hear the answer soon enough. The storm that had ripped across San Aegis finally broke by morning. The dock still glistened with rain, bullet casings scattered like seashells along the concrete. Evelyn Ward sat on a crate in the shadow of the Armory, her pistol stripped and drying beside her. Her body was steady, but inside she felt the pulse of something she hadn't allowed herself in years: unfinished business. Colonel Marcus Harlow paced nearby, radio pressed to his ear, his voice sharp but measured. "No, I don't care what the report says. 3 men in stolen MP uniforms don't just wander onto a restricted dock. Someone pulled those strings and I want names." He lowered the radio, jaw set. "They're going to bury this as a training mishap, same way they buried Deadeye." Evelyn didn't answer. She was staring past him at the horizon, at the grey line where sea met sky. She had accepted once that the ocean had taken her team, that Jonas, Mira, Elias were just names lost in the smoke of Basra. But last night's attack had stirred something deeper. If Alden wanted her erased now, it meant the story wasn't finished, and unfinished stories had a way of leaving trails. Harlow approached, quieter now. "You should know something. You weren't the only one who crawled out of Basra." Her head snapped around. "What did you just say?" He held her gaze. "Jonas Cruz, Mira Kowal. They're alive. I've kept it quiet because they've been working off-grid, tracing Alden's network. They wanted you left alone, thought you'd earned your peace. But after last night..." He let the thought hang. Evelyn stood slowly, the crate creaking beneath her. For a heartbeat she couldn't find words. Jonas's laugh, Mira's sharp voice. They'd been ghosts in her memory, companions she carried through nightmares. And now Harlow was telling her they were walking in the world again. "Where?" she demanded. Harlow gestured toward the North Cliffs, an old radar station, abandoned on paper. "They've made it theirs." The walkout took most of the day. The cliffs slick with spray, gulls circling above like sentries. The radar station crouched on the edge of the sea, its dome rusted, windows blown out by years of storms. Evelyn's boots echoed through the hollow corridor as Harlow led her inside. At first it seemed empty. Then a figure stepped out of the shadows, rifle slung low. His beard was thicker, his shoulders heavier, but the eyes were unmistakable. "Jonas!" Evelyn breathed. His grip on the weapon tightened. For a moment he looked as if he might not believe she was real. Then his voice came, roughened by years. "We buried you, Ward. We thought you were gone." Another voice rang out, sharp and edged with disbelief. She was gone. Or that's what she wanted. Mira Cowell emerged from a doorway, headset hanging around her neck, a half-soldered comms board in her hand. Her hair was cropped close now, her face marked by scars she hadn't worn in Basra. Evelyn's chest twisted. "I thought you both were dead." Mira's eyes narrowed. "And we thought you left us to die." The words struck like a bullet. Jonas stepped between them, his tone heavy. "We all made choices that night. None of us walked away clean. But if she's standing here alive, maybe that means it's not over." The air in the room was thick with old wounds. Evelyn met Mira's gaze and didn't look away. "I crawled out of that fire carrying every one of your voices. I didn't abandon you. I just didn't think anyone else survived." Silence stretched until Mira set the comms board down with a clatter. "Then you'd better prove it, because Alden hasn't stopped. And now that you've shown your face again, he'll come harder." Jonas finally allowed himself a faint, weary smile. "Feels like old times, just wetter and uglier." For the first time in 3 years, Evelyn felt something stronger than guilt. She felt the pull of her team, not whole, not healed, but alive. And alive meant dangerous. She gripped the edge of the rusted table, her voice steady. "Then Deadeye isn't finished. Not until Alden answers for Basra. The storm outside howled against the broken dome, as if agreeing. The ocean off San Aegis turned black under a bruised sky, waves rolling heavier as if the sea itself sensed the violence to come. Inside his fortified command office, General Victor Alden stood at the window, a cigar smoldering in his hand. Reports from San Aegis had been sanitized, but he knew the truth, Evelyn. Ward was alive, and worse, she had reunited with survivors of Deadeye. He exhaled smoke, eyes narrowing. "Then we do it again," he muttered. He turned to the man waiting in the corner. Commander Rhodes, leader of the Tidehunters, the Navy's covert kill squad. "No mistakes this time. Find them, finish them, sink whatever they touch." Rhodes nodded once, his men already boarding a fast cutter before dawn. The Tidehunters lived for this kind of work. Ambushes in the mist, close-quarter executions on rusting hulls. They were the scalpel Alden wielded when deniability mattered more than law. Hours later, Evelyn, Jonas and Mira crouched inside the gutted bridge of a supply vessel moored off the northern shoals. The ship had been abandoned for years, paint flaking, decks corroded, the smell of rust and salt heavy in the air. To the outside world, it was scrap. To Deadeye, it was a vantage point, a place to watch Alden's shipping lanes and intercept signals. But as the tide shifted, Jonas frowned through the cracked glass. "We've got movement. Cutter. 3 o'clock. Mira tapped at her tablet, intercepting bursts of encrypted comms. Her voice was grim. "They're not patrol. They're hunting. Tidehunters." Evelyn chambered a round in her rifle, the sound sharp in the hollow bridge. Then Alden, scared. She scanned the horizon, spotting the cutter slicing through waves, smaller boats peeling off its flanks, dark shapes, heavily armed, spreading like sharks around a wounded animal. The first shots came fast, suppressed bursts snapping across the deck, ricocheting off rusted steel. Evelyn dropped low, pulling Jonas with her. "Positions!" she barked, instinct taking over. Deadeye wasn't back on the books, but muscle memory didn't care. Jonas dragged a crate into cover. Rifle braced. 2. On the starboard gangway. His shots cracked, dropping one Tidehunter into the sea, the second slamming into a rail before tumbling over. Mira hunched behind the control console, rerouting what power still hummed through the dead ship. With a spark and a curse, she lit the floodlights on the port side, blinding a squad clambering up. Evelyn's rifle spoke once, clean and decisive. One headshot dropped them both before they could clear the ladder. The Tidehunters pressed harder, ropes slapping against the hull as more climbed. They moved with brutal precision, every motion screaming professional. This was no training exercise, it was extermination. Evelyn shifted across the deck, her boots slipping on slick steel. She ducked behind a lifeboat, lined her scope on a squad advancing through the mist. Breath steady, trigger smooth, 3 shots, 3 bodies collapsing into the dark water. But for each one that fell, more took their place. "Too many," Jonas growled, feeding another magazine. His eyes were wild but steady, adrenaline masking fear. "Then we cut their teeth," Evelyn replied. Her gaze flicked to the cutter anchored just offshore. Mounted on its bow, a heavy autocannon tracked lazily, waiting for orders to shred the derelict ship into driftwood. Mira caught her look. "You're not thinking—" "I am," Evelyn cut in. "If we don't take out that cutter, this ship becomes our coffin." Jonas swore. "How? It's a floating fortress. Not if we clip its eyes." Evelyn's voice was iron. She slung her rifle, grabbing a coil of rope. "Cover me." With the tide surging, she rappelled down the starboard side. Boots hitting the waterline hard. She waded waist-deep, slipping into the black surf, moving along the hull's shadow while Jonas and Mira poured suppressing fire from above. The cutter loomed larger with each stroke, its spotlight sweeping the waves. Evelyn ducked under, salt water burning her lungs, then surfaced beneath the cutter's blind side. Clambering onto a maintenance ladder, she hauled herself up, dripping, every muscle screaming. 2 Tidehunters guarded the deck. She crept low, seized one by the collar, and yanked him overboard without a sound. The second turned too late. Her knife flashed, and he crumpled silently. Evelyn dashed to the autocannon controls, breath ragged. She lined its sights, not on the derelict supply ship, but on the smaller boats circling around. One squeeze and the cannon thundered, shredding the attackers in a hail of fire. Explosions lit the night, boats splintering against the waves. Back on the supply ship, Jonas whooped, "That's our girl!" But the victory was razor thin. A Tidehunter squad still swarmed the deck of the derelict ship, pushing Mira into a corner. Evelyn swung the cutter's gun again, heart hammering, and unleashed a storm. The deck erupted, steel screaming, Tidehunters scattered or torn apart. When silence finally fell, only the sea remained, churning red beneath the broken floodlights. Evelyn stood on the cutter's deck, soaked and shaking, eyes fixed on the horizon. Alden had sent his scalpel, and she had snapped it in half, but she knew what that meant. The general would not retreat. He would double down. She keyed her comm to Jonas and Mira. "Deadeye survived one purge, we can survive another, but Alden won't stop until he's drowned us all." Lightning cracked over the ocean, illuminating the wreckage. For the first time in years, Deadeye stood together in battle. And the war was only just waking. The sea swelled under a moon smothered by clouds, whitecaps crashing against the legs of an oil rig long abandoned to storms. Its silhouette rose from the waves like a rusted skeleton, floodlights half dead, cables swaying in the wind. To most sailors, it was nothing more than a graveyard of steel. To Deadeye, it was the vault where General Victor Alden's secrets were buried. Jonas Cruz adjusted the strap of his pack as their small boat nosed through the chop, engine throttled low. "Tell me again why this isn't suicide," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the looming rig. "Because what we need is inside," Mira Cowell answered, hunched over her tablet, the glow of intercepted signals dancing across her face. "Alden uses this platform as a dark relay, off-books comms, shell networks, uplinked to satellites. Proof of every order he gave to wipe us out." Evelyn Ward sat at the bow, M24 cradled in her lap, her eyes never leaving the rig. The spray of salt stung her face, but she didn't blink. "Then we don't leave until we have it." The boat scraped against a barnacle-crusted ladder. Jonas went first, his boots slipping on wet rungs as he climbed. Mira followed, teeth clenched, clutching the tablet to her chest. Evelyn came last, rifles slung across her back. The wind howled through the superstructure, steel groaning like a dying beast. At the top, they found the deck empty but for scattered crates and a half-toppled crane. Rust glistened under the meager lights. Jonas crouched low, scanning the shadows. Too quiet. "It won't stay that way," Evelyn said. They moved in formation toward the control block. Mira slipped inside first, tapping into a panel with trembling fingers. Sparks showered, the smell of ozone sharp in the air. "I'm in," she whispered. "Encrypted logs, back channels, sat links, all of it's here." Jonas posted at the door, rifle steady. Evelyn climbed a stairwell to the catwalk, scope sweeping the sea. She saw the first hint of trouble before the alarm blared, lights flaring on a patrol craft slicing toward the rig. Black silhouettes crowded its deck. "Contact incoming," she radioed. "We've got 5 minutes." Mira's fingers flew. "I need 3. The first rope slapped against the rig's side, Tidehunters scaling like spiders in the storm. Jonas fired, dropping one into the waves, then another. Muzzle flashes lit the dark, brass shells tinkling on steel. Evelyn picked targets from above, each shot precise, her rifle a metronome in the chaos. A climber's helmet cracked, another rope severed. But for every one she dropped, 2 more clawed upward. 2 minutes, Mira shouted, sweat dripping down her temple. "The data's fragmenting, he's running a purge protocol." "Then stop him," Evelyn snapped, chambering another round. Jonas grunted as a round clipped his shoulder, spinning him back. He gritted his teeth, pressed the wound and kept firing. "I'll hold the door," he growled. defiance in his eyes. The tide hunters broke onto the deck, shadows surging in with knives and rifles. Evelyn dropped 3 before one tackled Jonas. They went down hard, grappling in the rain-slick steel. Jonas managed to drive a knee into the man's gut, then smashed his head against the railing. Blood mixed with salt spray, but Jonas stood. Barely. 30 seconds, Mira cried. Her screen filled with scrolling code. Almost there. A bullet slammed into the catwalk near Evelyn's leg, showering her with sparks. She rolled, brought the scope up, and found the shooter, a sniper perched on the patrol craft, scope gleaming. She timed her breath, felt the storm pause around her, and squeezed. His body pitched backward into the sea. "Got it!" Mira shouted, ripping a hard drive free from the console. "Every order, every signature, Alden's whole network. We have proof. Then we move," Evelyn barked. They sprinted for the ladder, bullets chasing them. Jonas staggered, his arm hanging limp, but Mira dragged him forward with surprising strength. Evelyn covered their retreat, her rifle barking into the night until her magazine clicked empty. She drew her sidearm, each shot buying seconds. They dropped one by one down the ladder, into the waiting boat. Evelyn was last, sliding down just as a grenade clattered onto the deck above. She hit the water hard, scrambled into the boat, and Jonas yanked the throttle. The oil rig erupted behind them, fire blooming skyward, shards of steel raining into the sea. Waves heaved, shoving their boat sideways, but the engine roared and carried them clear. Mira clutched the dripping hard drive to her chest like a relic. "This is it. Alden can't bury us now." Evelyn looked back at the burning skeleton of the rig, her face lit by the flames. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with something deeper than fire. "He'll try. And now he knows we're coming." The sea swallowed the wreck behind them, but the storm ahead was only growing. The hard drive dripped seawater onto the deck of the trawler as it hummed back to life, its diesel engine coughing against the spray. Evelyn sat hunched over the table in the cramped cabin, eyes fixed on the faint glow of Mira's screen. Every line of code unraveling from the device carried weight, names, orders, signals, all of Alden's shadow work preserved in encrypted archives. Jonas leaned against the bulkhead, his shoulder hastily bandaged, face pale but eyes sharp. "Tell me you can make sense of it." Mira's fingers moved fast, scrolling through gigabytes of dark logs. "There's enough here to bring Alden down twice over. Satellite uplinks, requisitions for tide hunters, comms routing back to his office." She hesitated, her voice dropping. "But there's something else." Evelyn lifted her head, the salt and smoke still clinging to her hair. "Show me." Mira opened a flagged file. The timestamp cut deep. It was from the Basra operation, the night Deadeye was lost. At first it looked like a routine sitrep, but the routing codes were wrong. Instead of going to Fleet Command, they fed directly into Alden's private channel and tagged at the bottom, a signature code that froze Evelyn in place. Sender, EC7. Jonas frowned. Elias Kane. The name hit Evelyn like a round to the chest. She remembered Elias's steady aim, his voice calm under fire, the way he'd called her captain even when Deadeye had no ranks. He had been the one holding the flank in Basra, the one she thought she'd heard scream before the comms went dead. She had carried his ghost like a weight for 3 years. "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "He was with us. He died with us." Mira scrolled further, her eyes hard. "Not according to this. He lived. And more than that, he fed our positions straight to Alden's kill teams. Every time we shifted, they knew. Every time we called, they were waiting. He sold us out." The cabin was silent, except for the groan of the hull and the hiss of the sea. Evelyn's hand clenched into a fist on the table, her knuckles white. "That doesn't make sense. Elias would never." Jonas slammed his palm against the bulkhead, the sound sharp. "You don't want to believe it, but look at the proof. He played us, Ward. We were bleeding out in the sand while he was already shaking hands with Alden." Mira's voice was cold. And now he's not just alive. He's Alden's ace. They call him Harpoon. He's been training tide hunters, leading covert ops across the straits. He's the one Alden trusts to finish what was started. Evelyn's vision tunneled, the cabin spinning with the roar of memory. Elias's face in Basra, lit by fire. The phantom scream she had thought was his. Had he staged it? Had she carried guilt for a man who had been alive, feeding their blood into Alden's hands? Jonas crouched in front of her, his voice steady but harsh. You need to face it. He's not your brother-in-arms anymore. He's the one who put us in the ground. Evelyn's jaw tightened until it hurt. Then I'll put him in the ground for real. Mira's gaze flicked up from the screen. Careful. That's what Alden wants. He's baiting you with Elias, dragging Deadeye out of the shadows so he can crush us all in one sweep. Evelyn met her eyes, steel over fire. Maybe, but this isn't just about Alden anymore. If Elias is alive, if he chose this path, then the storm ends with him. The engine growled as the trawler cut through the waves, the lights of San Aegis a faint glow on the horizon. The sea stretched endless and dark as if holding its breath for the reckoning to come. Jonas broke the silence, his voice quieter now. Then we hunt him, together, for Basra, for Deadeye. Evelyn picked up the M24, her thumb brushing the skull carved into the stock. For 3 years she had thought it was just a relic, a memorial. Tonight, it felt like a promise. The tide was rising, and somewhere out there, Elias Kane was waiting. The sea was glass that morning, calm and glittering beneath the rising sun, but every sailor on the flagship felt the tension humming through the decks. The annual naval review was supposed to be a celebration. Rows of destroyers in formation, politicians and admirals parading their power before the world. Evelyn Ward crouched on a forgotten catwalk above the radar mast, the M24 steady in her hands. To the spectators, she was invisible. To Deadeye, she was their only chance. Across the fleet, banners whipped in the breeze. The grandstand on the command deck overflowed with dignitaries, senators, foreign envoys, and Admiral Crowley, Alden's closest rival for influence. Colonel Harlow's warning replayed in Evelyn's head. This review isn't a parade. It's Alden's stage. Her comm crackled with Mira's voice from the operations skiff hidden beyond the horizon. We've confirmed chatter. Alden's not just covering tracks. He's staging an assassination. Crowley's the target. Blame it on Deadeye, frame it as rogue ghosts, and he rises as the only man who can restore order. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Then we cut the script before it begins. She scanned the mast of a frigate anchored 200 yards off the bow. There, just a flicker at first. Sunlight glinting off glass, then the faint outline of a man prone across the steel lattice. Her chest clenched. Elias Kane. Even at that distance she recognized his poise. The steady breathing, the relaxed trigger finger, the predator's patience. He had been her shadow in training, her second in Basra. The man she once trusted to cover her back. Now his crosshairs were crawling toward the grandstand. Target confirmed, she whispered. It's him. Jonas's voice answered from the skiff, hard as stone. Make it count, Ward, for Basra. The world shrank into scope and breath. Evelyn waited for the swell of applause below to mask her shot, but Elias fired first. A single suppressed crack, the round screaming toward Admiral Crowley. Evelyn squeezed. Her bullet intercepted his, shattering against steel inches above the Admiral's head. Sparks showered the stage, panic erupting through the crowd. Elias cursed into her earpiece, his channel bleeding across the net. Always a half-second faster, weren't you? His voice was bitter, older, but unmistakable. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She shifted, fired again, forcing him to roll behind the mast. Why, Elias? Why sell us out? His laughter was hollow. Because Alden showed me what survival meant. You clung to loyalty. I chose life. Below, chaos spread. Security shoved dignitaries into cover. but Alden stood unmoved at the podium, his expression calm. He wasn't surprised. He was waiting. Evelyn's gut twisted. He wanted this spectacle. Deadeye branded as terrorists in front of the world. Mira's frantic voice cut through. "Evelyn, it's worse than Crowley." Alden's feeding secondary coordinates. He's staging 2 shots, one to kill Crowley, one to graze himself. He wants to rise as the wounded hero who takes down Deadeye. The realization slammed into her like a wave. Alden had engineered every step: Basra's betrayal, the purge, Elias's survival. This review, one staged bullet and he would be untouchable. Elias broke cover, firing again. Evelyn rolled left, his round tearing sparks from the rail. She returned fire, clipping the steel near his cheek. For a moment, their eyes met through scopes. Teacher and student, mirror images twisted by betrayal. "You could have been more than a ghost," Elias growled. "But you chose the grave. I chose power." Her reply was ice. "You chose Alden's leash." Another crack, this one hers. The bullet ripped through his scope, shattering glass into his eye. Elias screamed, rolling from the mast, clutching his face. He didn't fall, but he was finished. On the podium, Alden raised his hand theatrically, pointing toward the chaos. "Deadeye!" he roared, his voice booming through speakers. The traitors strike again. Soldiers scrambled, weapons raised. His narrative was minutes from locking into history. Evelyn steadied her rifle, crosshairs sliding from Elias's broken form to Alden's chest. One squeeze and it would all end, but Mira's voice was sharp. "No, don't martyr him. Shoot the comms rig on his podium. Expose the uplink he's been feeding orders through." Evelyn exhaled. Lightning clarity surged through her veins. She shifted her aim and fired. The bullet smashed the podium's comms module, sparks spraying data, screens flickering to life before the cameras broadcasting live. Logs spilled across the displays. Alden's orders, the kill signatures. The evidence of his conspiracy projected for the fleet to see. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Admirals stared, soldiers faltered, and Alden's face finally cracked. The hero's mask slipped, revealing fear. Evelyn whispered into the channel, her voice for him alone. "The tide doesn't keep secrets, Alden. It brings them back." The flagship erupted with shouts as MPs swarmed the stage, not for Evelyn, but for Alden. The man who thought he could write history with blood now stood shackled under his own lights. On the mast, Evelyn withdrew from the scope, her shoulder trembling, her cheek wet with salt and sweat. Elias lay broken but alive, a living witness to Alden's betrayal. The sea below churned with the roar of engines and panic, but for the first time since Basra, Evelyn felt the current shift. Deadeye wasn't finished. The ghosts had come back in the daylight, and the world had seen. Rain began to fall just as the applause of the crowd dissolved into chaos. The naval parade was no longer a celebration, but a reckoning. On the flagship's main deck, Alden's hands were forced behind his back, steel cuffs locking into place. His face, usually unreadable, twisted in disbelief as MPs dragged him past the stunned admirals and foreign delegates. The broadcast screens still flickered with his encrypted orders, the proof no one could bury now. Elias Kane knelt at the base of the radar mast, his eye bandaged, his face ashen. He wasn't dead, but the fight had carved something permanent into him. Jonas hauled him to his feet, voice low but iron. "You'll speak, Kane. You'll tell them what you did at Basra. You'll tell them Alden's orders." Elias's lips trembled, the bravado gone. I thought survival meant serving him. I was wrong." Mira didn't flinch. "You'll live with that mistake, and you'll make sure the world hears it." Evelyn descended the mast slowly, her boots slick with rain, the M24 cradled at her side. Soldiers gave her a wide berth, some out of respect, others out of fear. She paused before Elias, her gaze steady. "Deadeye carried your ghost for 3 years. Now you'll carry ours for the rest of your life." The fleet moved under emergency orders, ships breaking formation, helicopters buzzing above, but beneath the storm, a different silence settled over Evelyn and her team. Not victory, not relief, something harder, more enduring. Survival with purpose. Later, in a quiet berth away from the chaos, Jonas leaned against the rail of a supply ship, the horizon stretching endless and grey. Deadeye can't come back, not officially. Too much blood on those files. Evelyn nodded. We don't need the name. We just need the mission. Mira closed her tablet with a snap, salt spray glinting on her lashes. Then we build something new. A net no admiral can cut, no general can drown. An Overwatch fleet, ghosts watching the waves. For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. The sea had tried to bury them, but ghosts had a way of surfacing. She reached into her pack, pulled out a single brass casing etched with the Deadeye skull, and set it on the railing. The rain polished it until it gleamed like gold. "Let them remember," she whispered. The casing clinked as it rolled into the water, swallowed by the tide, carried outward into the vast unknown. Somewhere beyond the horizon, others would hear their story. Others would know that Deadeye had not died. It had evolved. The sea surged, endless and unforgiving, but Evelyn Ward stood steady on the deck, rifle at her side, eyes forward. She had walked into the storm once more, and emerged not as a ghost alone, but as the first of many. The tide would rise again, and with it, the mark of Deadeye. If you've stayed with us until the end, you've just witnessed how Evelyn Ward, once erased by her own command, rose from the shadows of the sea to expose betrayal at the highest level. But here's the question for you. If you discovered a comrade you trusted had betrayed your entire unit, would you grant them mercy as Evelyn did? Or would you demand justice on the spot? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you. And if stories like this remind you that hidden courage should never be buried, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll never miss the next chapter here on A Simple Woman. Don't stop now. Click on the video waiting on screen to keep exploring the stories of ordinary women who became legends when the tide turned against them.